No worries.
All right, so let's see, go live on those. Okay, Twitter's acting funny, but no worries. I could always do Twitter later, and just gotta get Rockfin ready. Good, the Rockfin is fine. I know a lot of times Twitter has been kind of a little strange on certain things. So
I didn't even know that you're allowed to do a live on Twitter. That's great.
yeah,
You learn something new every day, I guess.
yeah. Well, depending on which topics, I will stream Twitter, YouTube, Rockfin, and occasionally Facebook too.
Amazing. Cool.
Mhm. And I figure it's the best way, especially when you're a smaller platform, to get out to more people. That's the
100%.
best way to,
Yeah.
really kind of get everybody involved in the conversation. So we are live and good to go on all platforms. I am, well, except for Twitter. We'll worry about Twitter later. I am glad. First thing, I see a couple of normal viewers here. I see Pacheco. I see Baba. So glad you guys are here for the conversation. I'm going to make sure to try to save some time towards the end. If you guys have any questions for our guests, please, please, please make sure to put them in there. That way we can involve them in the conversation. Hopefully you guys are all being respectful. I know my typical crowd is, but anybody who might be coming in, make sure we're always being respectful to our guests. So today we have Shweta Aggarwal. Make sure you correct me if I get it wrong.
That's fine. That's absolutely correct.
But I ran across her watching her on another platform that was giving an interview, and she just recently, well, I'm not sure if it was just recent at the time, but I know she had written a book, and I'll show it here for you all, the Black Rose, which after watching the interview, I went out immediately. I got the book. I reached out to Shweta, and I wasn't entirely sure. I was like, she's an author. I'm not entirely sure if she'll have the time. I know busy schedules and stuff like that. But she was gracious enough to really write me back, fairly reasonably, fairly quick. And she was like very down to earth and was like, yeah, sure. I have no problem with setting up an interview. And so we set a time that would work with our schedules. And so here we are today. And this book, I'll just read the cover just a little bit. Of course, it says The Black Rose and gives her name. It says, my story of colorism silently lived by millions. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of, I guess, the level of what's going on. And it's kind of one of those things that's in our face, but kind of hid below the surface a little bit. And so, Shweta, I'm so glad to have you here. So please let everybody kind of know a little bit of your story and what else you'd like to add, which I left out.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Marcus, for having me on your platform. I am really honored that you got in touch. And for me, this is all about raising awareness. And so it's not even about the book, it's about spreading my message. And so every opportunity that I get with people like yourselves reaching out and inviting me onto their platform, I see this as a really big opportunity to spread my message. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. With regards to the book, you've kind of like hit the nail on the head with the reading the strapline, a story of colorism silently lived by millions. It's almost like an oxymoron because I say silently, but yet it's so normalized in our culture in the South Asian community, as well as, I'm pretty aware of this, that it's normalized in the Black community, in the East Asian community. It's so normalized that it's trivialized, which is why people live it silently.
Yeah, it really caught my attention because, like, especially in the Afro-Latino community, that's where I more noticed it first, especially, like, for instance, Dominican Republic, and you notice it in certain other places. And then I started kind of seeing it more with, like, Nigeria and certain parts of Central and West Africa. And then I started noticing it creep a little bit more into the Caribbean. and then I started noticing it becoming a lot more mainstream just in the American Black community. And I was like, somebody really needs to talk about this.
Mm.
And some of the things which you said in your book really echoed what I was seeing, even though, you know, India and Japan being halfway around the world, where a lot of the book takes place,
Yeah.
it does encompass something which is much larger. So I just, you know, I wanted to, you know, definitely that we keep that in mind for the audience. Your thoughts on what you've seen as far as, you know, living in the UK now,
Mhm.
uh, that impact of that there in the UK, how it spreads, how you've seen it from, you know, Southeast Asia and different parts of Asia and over into, you know, possibly the Americas, because I'm sure you see what's going on in the different places also.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's everywhere. Unfortunately, colorism is something that people of color live with
Hmm.
everywhere. So essentially, colorism is prevalent in the entire non-white world,
Yeah.
right? Because everybody is aspiring to be fairer to that white proximity, right?
Hmm.
Um, which is really, really sad and ironic, because you know we have beautiful melanated skin that actually protects us from the sun.
Hmm.
You know, we have color of, you know, all different shades, and
Yeah.
we have diversity for that reason. Um, whereas, you know, and also sadly and ironically, it's the white world that kind of claimed their superiority themselves,
Mhm.
and called us people of color, right? And
Yes.
yet we're aspiring to do exactly what we are fighting, right? So yeah, it's something that I see very much prevalent in the UK as well. Essentially, South Asians, like, you know, in my community, Indians that I see everywhere. It obviously was the case in India. You've read the book, and you know the amount of like rife colorism that I went through and experienced as a child. The Indian community in Japan, same thing. Indian community here in the UK, the same thing. Um, they carry colorism with them essentially wherever they go. That's
Hmm.
just how it is with not just Indians, not just South Asians, East Asians, people of color everywhere, right? My book is resonating with people who are American Filipino, who are half Japanese and half British, who are from the Caribbean, area, and I'm receiving amazing reviews and feedback from people literally of color everywhere around the world, and it's resonating with them, as you said. Although my story is set in India and Japan, in the UK, for example, I'll give you an example to like essentially summarize what colorism is even now in this country. My daughter goes to a school that is just happens to be predominantly South Asian girls.
Hmm.
Um, she told me just a few months ago, right after my book launch, actually, because she started sharing with me as well, you know, after I started writing. And right after my book launch, she told me that, Mummy, there are girls in my school who will not sit out in the sun during lunch hour because they're afraid that their mothers will tell them off for tanning. One of their mothers actually has told their daughter off, saying, "You'll come back looking like a crow."
Mm.
So, you know, these are the kind of words that are being used. This is the language that is being used even now in this day and age, and it's 2023. And this is one of the reasons why skin whitening products are thriving. The sales are thriving. I mean, we're talking about the sales being around $8 billion in 2020, $1 billion, right, in 2020 around the world globally. And that's projected to increase to over $12 billion by 2027.
Mm.
Phenomenal growth. Phenomenal. Why? Because people are obsessed with the narrative that fair is beautiful. And unfortunately, it does impact women more than men, I have to say.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, because of the beauty standards and the way that the skin whitening industry is selling this narrative. But it's a huge global problem and it's a growing issue. So, you know, I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because we need to have a lot more of these conversations. There are only like a handful of anti-colorism activists out there who are talking about it, myself included. I'd like to believe that I am one now. And sadly, when you do, there's a lot of backlash as well. So, like
Mhm.
one of the few things that well, not few, one of the things that I hear repeatedly, um, all the time is, oh, but you're not even that dark. you're
Hmm.
light skinned, and it's like, well, it's all relative, that's the problem with colorism. It's all relative. Like I talked about my story in my book, um, and what I went through, because my parents are really fair skinned. I mean, they're literally as fair as Indians can get, like the kind of
Hmm.
Eurocentric kind of, fair skinned, features, as well as light eyes, all of that. And then there's me. Yes, I am lighter now, but I was a lot darker, a lot more melanated when I was a child. So you can imagine the difference in the skin tone, and therefore the bullying that I went through.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's one of the things that I really find infuriating when people say such things, because it's almost like, well, you're not allowed to fight colorism if you are not dark enough. Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I mean, it's the most ludicrous thing I've heard of.
Well, I mean, reading your book, I understand why you would feel that way, and why it's a different and it's relative to you know the different community you're in, and
Mm,
the differences between what's going on there. I think like it's very, especially for like a lot of Black Americans, why this is not quite understood nearly as much, because there's that separation of people of color in different communities, because America's still a lot more segregated, whether
mm,
we really acknowledge it or not.
mhm,
And even though you might have those different, ranges of color within the Black community, it's more so somebody who's very, very, very light to somebody who's very, very dark. There might be some kidding back and forth, but
mm,
it's never a sense that you're better. And
mm,
so that's why we don't really see it the same.
mhm,
Because when it comes down to it, we all know that, well, we all feel that we're kind of second class to non-white communities.
mm,
And so therefore it's a little bit different. And so when I was trying to explain it to people and they were seeing your image and they're like, but she's not really dark. And I'm like, but you got to understand the relativity to where she was growing up. She's growing up in the northern part of India where it's more fair skinned people. And for them, she's darker. But if she would be in the South, then she would be considered more fair skinned. And what it reminded me, because I straddle different communities, what you see as far as in the indigenous community, when you have somebody who's darker versus somebody who's more fair skinned, it's sometimes a little bit more reverse. You have the indigenous people who sometimes they have an issue with some of the people more fair skinned, because they call them like stuff like half breeds, and that they're not entirely, they're not entirely indigenous. And
mm,
the same sometimes you would see from the Japanese community to somebody who's mixed, and they would call him like a, what was it, Guaylo, I believe, stranger, outsider. And so it's definitely focused on like, you're not one of us. And just that feeling of making people not one of you, othering them,
yes.
it's something that, because like, I'll tell you, seeing, especially Latino people who walk around with umbrellas
Mhm.
because they try not to get darker. And it reminded me of what I was reading in your book.
That's right. They do the same in Japan. Yeah. Um, so it is it is really a shame, because what I'm finding now is that, and what I really believe in truly, is that we have to fight colorism with kindness, empathy, and compassion. I mean, if we're trying to fight this together, then we can't be othering, as you said, and we can't fight within ourselves. We have to fight it together, right? And how are we going to achieve that if we don't actually understand each other and have that empathy for each other? So on my page, in particular, I try and empathize with any experience. Like even people who are lighter than me, I don't ridicule them saying, well, how can you have experienced colorism? um, because yes, of course, there is a fine line, right? There are people who, I'm not going to deny, are relatively fair skinned, and they're looking for empathy, or they're just playing the victim card. Oh well,
Yeah.
I was, and you get a sense, right? You get a sense of what's really kind of genuine or not. um, and there But then on the other hand, there are people who genuinely want to change. And if you are going to ridicule them and say, well, your experience is invalid because you're already fair skinned in my eyes,
Hmm.
they're never going to change, because that's it. Like, you've shut the doors on them, right?
Hmm.
Whereas if you empathize and then you educate them and you start to tell them, well, actually, I understand what you may have experienced, but there are people who have a much darker skin tone. And let's talk about colorism, like in terms of the dark side of colorism, the casteism, classism in India, how people are treated because of their skin color, how they are really othered, and they don't forget about the fair is beautiful narrative. They don't even have success in their jobs. They're not given jobs because of
Yep.
their color. In terms of the criminal, like the justice system, we I think I read somewhere that even in the States, for example, the darker skinned black people are punished more severely and are
Mm.
more likely to get stopped by the cops than the lighter skinned black people. There is racism, of course, in America as well. We all know about that.
Oh yeah.
And that's how that's my awakening, right, from the George Floyd murder, and what happened then. And yeah, I mean, there is so much relativity in this topic, in terms of colorism and where people stand, right, on the spectrum. But what
Mm.
I'm trying to do with my book and my message is that forget the spectrum, just put that aside for a second. Let's just talk about what it does to you, and why, right? What it does to your mindset, your self-esteem, and why are you putting up with this?
Yeah, I think it reminds me back to like some of the stuff you talked about with the Wicked Man, and and I think a lot of people, like, if I feel like if we explain it this way, think back to when you were at a very more vulnerable age
Mm-hmm.
and more open to being influenced, and how there are things that we experienced back then. Maybe it's not on this topic or something, but it's something else that it still impacts us today. And I think that's what a lot of people, they don't really wrestle with that. And so I kind of wanted to go into where does this all come from in our societies that we're going through this. I feel a lot of people don't try to dig deeper. Well, I'm not saying you. I'm saying just different people that I've seen. They might say, "Oh, well, she's an author, so let's just talk about the book, and it's kind of professional, and let's talk about the book and kind of on with it." But I think that it's more important to have actual conversations to try to figure out where some of this is going, and then or where it's coming from, and we can kind of work back to it. I wanted to share Liz's comment, and thanks, sweetie. She says, "Good morning from the other room. This is ridiculous. Skin bleaching is a major issue that some celebrities do." The baseball player, I'm not sure if you know Sammy Sosa is or not, but Sammy Sosa was a Dominican baseball player who's
Mm-hmm.
started off much darker than I am. Now he's bleached himself to literally lighter than you are. And he claims, oh, it was just from playing in the dark in the brutal sun in Chicago. But no, I'm really much, much more fair skinned. And, that brainwashing that's in there. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel a lot of it's enforced through the entertainment industry.
100%.
And I was kind of wondering to hear some of your thoughts on how much you feel the entertainment industry is a big culprit in a lot of this that's going on.
Yeah, huge, absolutely massive. So, two points that I'd like to talk about and touch upon.
Hmm.
Firstly, thank you for understanding what the wicked man did to my
Hmm.
self-esteem in
Yeah.
my book and my story. I think that's what I wanted to get across through sharing my story. That it's please don't trivialize what a child goes through, and
Hmm.
especially when a child doesn't have her parents around to tell her to negate every other toxic comment and say no, that's not true. Don't believe this, and you are beautiful the way you are. That's what
Hmm.
happened with me, right? I didn't have my family with me, and I had all these taunts and toxic comments being thrown at me as a 6-year-old child. So as you can
Hmm.
imagine what that did to my self-esteem. And what I really, really, really would ask people to do, and to take away from this interview, is to please not trivialize the impact of colorism, because it starts at a very young age.
Hmm.
And that set me for life. My self esteem was rock bottom from that point on. And I then eventually came to do what I started doing, as you know, the second point, which touching upon skin bleaching and all that. I did it. I did it for decades. I bleached my skin twice a week, twice a month. Once I entered my late teens, I did that for about 2 decades. I started using skin whitening creams, and I've used skin whitening creams for over 3 decades. Only after I had my awakening in 2020 is when I stopped. And now it's been 3 years. I found an old bleaching cream, a Jolene bleaching cream in my bathroom cupboard last week. And I actually shared that on my story saying, look at this, I'm proud of myself, you know, it's untouched. And it's an addiction. It becomes an addiction. It's something that you can't shake off because you are repeatedly told by your community, your extended family members, your friends, every time you speak to somebody or you're on a Skype call with, family back home in India, like, oh, what happened to you? You turned so dark, right? This is the first thing that you hear from them. Not even, hi, how are you? The first reaction is, oh, what happened to you? They use the word kali, which means black, like, oh, you turned black. Yeah. And why are you going out on beach holidays, etc.? So when you are greeted with such comments, you're naturally going to want to reach out for those creams, right? Because you feel like you're drowning in colorism. It's everywhere. And it's omnipresent to the point where you feel like you just can't fight it. So you think, okay, well, let me just start using these products. Yeah. Thirdly, and most importantly, as you said, the entertainment industry, the media world, they brainwash you into believing that only fair is beautiful. The creams that I used to use had the same woman on the cream on the tube with 4 different shades. And, naturally, because they wanted to sell their cream, the darkest shade that she was looked completely defeated and miserable. And then, of course, as she turns fairer, she's got the biggest smile on her face. So this sort of marketing, this sort of, psychology that they use for selling their product is what eventually is being absorbed by us, right? And you don't see it, especially in Bollywood, for example. That's my entertainment industry. Yeah, that I grew up with Bollywood. Did I see any dark skin representation? No, nothing. There was one actress, one, who I remember seeing in the 1980s, and she, absolutely stunning, one of the best actresses of Bollywood. But that was it. After that, there were only fair-skinned actresses. And then there came a time when, in the 1990s and then 2000 onwards, there was only fair-skinned actresses. And we're talking Eurocentric beauty features and like looks, yeah? So not just fair skin, but light eyes as well, gray eyes, green eyes, looking like they don't even look like Indians. They look European.
Wow. I mean,
and then there is my skin tone, and then there are people who are even darker in this southern part of India, as you mentioned. I went to Bangalore and I studied there for 4 years, and yes, I was lighter. As soon as I walked around Bangalore, I was like, oh, I'm not dark here. I'm actually one of the fairer ones,
Yeah.
The whole thing is just ludicrous, honestly, when you're constantly comparing yourself and your color to people. And India is such a diverse country as well, right? So you do see the Eurocentric features all the way up in the north in Kashmir with light eyes and extremely fair skin. And then you see the very, very dark skinned, gorgeous melanated people in the southern part of India. Because of that diversity, the differences in color, the Indian entertainment industry makes it more of a deal, a bigger deal, and then they perpetuate it.
Well, yeah, there's a lot, man. I was thinking back to that because when I watched your interview with Philip Scott, it was like certain questions that I was like, man, I wish I could interject this into the conversation, because I feel that a lot of people don't focus on that, and I wish that you guys would have touched on that, and because it definitely does go back to this. And I remember watching a lot on Telemundo or Univision, and you would see that pretty much anybody who was on there were lighter Latinos.
Mm-hmm.
and all of the darker had to be the maids or had to be like chauffeurs, and they were
Yeah.
always, the secondary cast member. And then just on American TV, you notice where almost every commercial growing up, everybody's white. Most of the top shows, everybody's white with like just throw one random person of color on there.
Mm-hmm.
So in this show, you might have a black person. This show, you have an Asian person. This show, and so they would do this on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And I like people because my expertise mostly goes into history. And
Mm-hmm.
so looking back to the origins of a lot of this stuff, this goes back to colonization more than anything. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with Willie Lynch. Have you heard of Willie Lynch before?
No.
Well, Willie Lynch was a plantation owner, and he was out of the Caribbean, and he decided that he came up with a way of breaking down and controlling slaves. And I just thought this was kind of interesting because I know about India's history with
Yeah.
the caste system
Mm-hmm.
and how it works on the different racial lines. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, a lot of this colonialism and colorism was started out of racism. A lot of times through the different enslavements that happened from a lot of the Western countries, be it Spain, Portugal, United States, Germany, all of these different countries,
Mm-hmm.
because everybody else, though we before that probably didn't see ourselves very different, they othered all of us
Exactly.
totally. And so they basically made it the Willie Lynch letter basically was about division. He literally wrote out instructions on how to separate a group of people and to keep them submissive. And
Yeah.
so by making each other their own enemies, men are
Yeah.
against women, old against young, lighter against darker. And the one that was the strongest was lighter versus darker. And so I just wanted to put that comparison that I noticed from the systems that happened on in most of the Western countries and what you saw in a lot of the Asian countries, even sweeping into parts of the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like even the big, I remember the whole what was it, the Egyptology movement, where it's about well the fair skinned Egyptians are actually the real Egyptians, and
Mm.
it's kind of dismissing the darker typical, well, I say phenotypical, darker African or sub-Saharan or
Yeah.
Nubian, as they say,
Mm-hmm.
African in Egypt. And I was just wondering, like, your thoughts on that tie between those two worlds being so different but so same,
Yeah.
and I guess what came out of colonialism and caste systems and slavery and things like that.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, colorism. There are three factors, right? That bring us to colorism, right? There's obviously casteism in India, which is still very rife, and it's such a shameful social construct that it just angers me so much. Casteism, essentially, just to summarize, in India, is basically um, categorization of people into four castes. And you're kind of born into the caste, because if you're a Brahmin and you're born into a Brahmin family, you're a Brahmin. And Brahmins are the highest caste. So they're like priests and pandits and educators, etc. Then comes the Kshatriyas, which is like the warrior caste. This is like something that, was created thousands of years ago, right? I mean, it's not even valid in this day and age. Then come the business class, people who are just merchants and business people, etc. And then come the Shudras, which is the labor class. Um, and then a fifth class was added much later on, called the Dalits, which is like terrible. I hate to even say this. They're called the untouchables. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
literally, yeah, it's terrible, absolutely terrible. Um, Needless to say, the Brahmins are usually fair skinned, and the Dalits are usually much darker in their skin tone. So as you can imagine, there's colorism right there, right? So it's very difficult to talk about colorism in India without talking about casteism. Then there is classism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exception is that the fairer you are, the most likely the wealthier you are.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because the fairer ones were not required to work in the sun. and the labor class is the ones who have been working in the sun, the peasants and what have you from back in the day. Then there is, of course, colonialism and
Mm-hmm.
white people entering all these countries and colonizing all these countries and claiming themselves as superior because they're white and
Mm-hmm.
treating darker skinned people, really, really terribly. And also, as you said, creating that divide within the community by employing lighter skinned people to do more kind of like respectable tasks for them, quote unquote, administrative tasks or working in their houses, house help, whereas the darker skinned ones were asked to work under dire conditions in the sun outside.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So because of these three, uh, you know, factors, we are here today with regards to colorism. Having said that, I think the root cause of colorism is actually classism, because there are countries that have never been colonized. For example, like all of East Asia, right? Never been colonized. But
Mm-hmm.
colorism is rife there in China, Japan, Korea, everywhere, the Philippines, Indonesia, etc. Because the root cause is classism. They believe that they see you as somebody who's beneath them if you have a darker skin tone, because you are not wealthy enough. You probably worked out, were working in the sun, and you were outside labor class. Yeah. Um, Likewise, in the Middle Eastern countries, never colonized, but similar mindset. Um, and funnily enough, I remember watching this on Bridgerton. I think it was the second or third episode of the second series, where this is obviously in the Tudor times. So this was, you know, pre-colonization, I think. And one of the mothers was basically telling her daughter off for standing by the window. And she said, "What are you doing, standing by the window? You want to catch the sun and look like a freckled beggar?"
Mm.
So they had that mindset even among themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so hence the umbrellas. When you go, you see umbrellas all over the place, right? In the Bridgerton series, they're walking out in the sun with umbrellas. So that mindset, essentially, I think classism is what we're really fighting, I feel personally. And then comes, casteism, because again, they're very intertwined. And then, of course, the colonialistic ideologies, white
Yeah.
supremacy.
I definitely agree. Because I was trying to do some thinking into, okay, so why is it in some of these other countries and that doesn't have the same kind of history, like you brought out, the caste system in India is much older than a lot of the European expansion. Well, yes and no, because a lot of people forget that Alexander the Great, so-called Great, did colonize India then. So you did have, that kind of dichotomy. And anybody who believes that, oh, well, this concept of racism or race is something new, I tell them that literally, if you go back and look at the names of some of these places, like for instance, Ethiopia. A lot of people don't know what Ethiopia means. Ethiopia means burnt face. I mean,
Wow.
Nigeria, Nigeria or Niger, but it's actually a Greek word and it doesn't have the soft G, which is pronounced with now. It literally was the same as the Nigger.
Oh my
And
God.
a
Terrible.
lot of people don't realize how ingrained a lot of this stuff even goes back to.
Mm.
Um, like and so this kind of I think some of this goes back to even, like, for instance, the sub-Saharan slave trade and the Silk Road slavery, where you had a lot of slavery out of Africa going into parts of, I would say, so-called the Rhineland or Black Sea area,
Mhm.
where modern day Russia, going into certain parts of Turkey, and then going into all the way as far as even China and Japan. And so if you kind of see these people, and throughout history, these people have been depicted as the assistants or slaves or servants. And then you have Hollywood, which blasts that whole, that dichotomy, even into these countries where it's very little of that experience. it
Hmm.
helps perpetuate it even in place. So it's kind of like you keep the racism going even in countries where you're not even at and have physical control.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know
Well,
your thoughts on that.
yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, there's literally like, firstly, I didn't even know that that's the background. In terms of like why Ethiopia is called Ethiopia and Nigeria is called Nigeria. That's absolutely terrible.
Well, to
Um,
add in also in Africa, for one part, they called the whole country Ethiopia. So they were literally all people over there burnt faces, and then it switched for a while where all black people, because the term Ethiopia and Kush start becoming interchangeable. Kush or Kushi meaning black, and so that they were using those colorism terms
mm,
interchangeably. Europeans were using those terms interchangeably since the BC days.
yeah. Wow. So, I mean, firstly, regarding Alexander the Great, you're absolutely right, right? Even before him, we had the Aryan race
Yeah.
conquering India through the Khyber Pass and Afghanistan and Iran and all that, thousands of years ago. So that lighter skinned, light eyed race had conquered India. We're talking thousands of years ago already, anyway.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's when this whole thing kind of, the roots of colorism in India, essentially, I mean, that's where it started. But before that, India was predominantly a brown country, right?
Yeah. Right.
The Dravidian race, by nature, by essentially, is a brown race as such.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, there's definitely that, the Aryan race conquering India and claiming themselves as superior, and uh, eventually you kind of get the mixed, the various different shades of browns and even very fair skin that you see in India. And the very fair skinned ones are like the Aryan race. They claim that they consider themselves lucky. They claim that they're like the Aryan race, but
Hmm.
without even realizing that that's actually not really Indian.
True.
Yeah. Which is, again, so ironic, right? So ironic.
Hmm.
And them to then look down upon people who are darker skinned and the original Indians, quote unquote.
Hmm.
It just doesn't make any sense. And yes, and then there's, of course, as you said, racism and colorism as such, they're so closely related, aren't they? And
Yeah.
eventually, as I've described in my book, even with racism, unfortunately, everything comes down to the color of your skin. You
Hmm.
know, you have that racist experience because you look different,
Yep.
right? And you look different. The first thing that people notice is the color of your skin, because that's literally what identifies you, quote unquote, because it's the
Mhm.
largest organ on your body.
True.
It's not like, oh, well, you look different because your hair is different. You look different because your eyes are different. It's the entire package. The entire package is what? The color of your skin.
Hmm.
So, yeah, so it is something that I think we're still, as you said, we're still fighting, white supremacy around the
Yeah.
world, this white skin privilege. And I really hope that more and more conversations like this, um, you know, help raise awareness. And I do feel that we need to have these conversations, as uncomfortable as they can be for white people. If they want to be educated, they need to be tuning into these sort of conversations.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I like to put this out, and I forget. I guess I didn't do this disclaimer for anybody who's white who's listening to this conversation. This is not like, okay, so now we're gonna go round you guys all up for what you guys have done, and now we're gonna like just shake our fingers at you and shame you into a corner. It's about trying to address some of these things and just unpack it. And if we can see things differently, we can see people differently and treat people differently. And so
Exactly.
that's more the goal. It's not about trying to scold anybody. It's about telling people what we're experiencing and not being gaslit into saying that doesn't exist. That's not what's happening. So that we can feel, that everybody can feel more whole. And I don't think a lot of people understand that trauma literally is passed down. There have been psychologists and geneticists been able to prove that a person might not have went through the same trauma that their parent or grandparent might have went through, but they still have the anxieties from it. because it gets passed down through the years. And so some of the colonial mindset, even though some of countries are not experiencing that. I mean, the British left from India long ago, but their impact was still left. And then you factor in adding in, faith, the faith of the different communities. And sometimes if one sect of the community, which happen to be, say, more fair skinned, adopt this religious faith, then that also, makes it even more convoluted and complex. Because I remember reading your book about what you experienced with after the assassination, and I guess I'll just tee it up there so that you can kind of explain it a little bit more for the audience and what it was like while you guys were running from the rioters who were looking for particular children who I mean, it didn't even matter if they were children, that they wanted to kill them also. And I think that especially like Black Americans, thinking of the racism that we face here and thinking back to the KKK not being that long ago and hate crimes and stuff, a lot of times might feel that other people are not experiencing possible physical danger by the differences in their race and color.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. So, when your life is in danger, one of the first things that you are you're doing is you're looking at yourself, right? And you're thinking, well, what chances do I have, and why am I in danger? You're in
Mhm,
danger because you're the other you're from a different community, and they're attacking you for belonging to that community. And as a child, as you can imagine, as a 7-year old, of course, I couldn't process what was going on. So this was to do with the Indira Gandhi assassination in
mhm,
1984 in India. And the Sikh community was being violently attacked because there were two Sikh men who assassinated Indira Gandhi. And it was all to do with the Khalistan movement and the Sikh community wanting their own state, well, their own country. And tension was building up in the country around that. And of course, Indira Gandhi wanted to keep, the country together. And there were things that she obviously, did wrong as well. And there were wrong decisions taken. Um, and so after her assassination, Delhi just became this like literally like war zone. Um, and Hindus were violently attacking the Sikhs, and they weren't sparing anybody. Anybody. Women were being physically violated, gang violated. Children were not even being spared. If they saw a Sikh child, especially boys, they were attacking, killing children too. So it was an extremely traumatic experience for me as a 7-year old, and which is why I guess I still remember it. And as you said, trauma is something that you remember, it stays with you, you carry it.
mhm,
And I remember being absolutely petrified because I thought I was going to die because we had this mob um, behind our coach. And they were basically coming towards us with these torches of, flames. And we thought, that's it, we're going to be burnt alive, because that's what was happening a lot. They were attacking coaches and trains for mass killings. Um,
mhm,
yeah, so I remember that vividly because I thought I was going to die that day and I was going to be burnt alive. Um, but what the teachers did was really quick thinking. They basically took off the turbans of the boys and they undid their hair really quickly and then put dresses on them really quickly. And before you knew it, they firstly looked like they'd gone from looking like a boy to a girl. And secondly, they didn't look like Sikh boys. They didn't have that turban on them.
mhm,
So, it was kind of like a way of, ensuring that the, the mob out there, you essentially you're tricking them. Um,
mhm,
and I remember vividly thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die because I look like a boy. I had a bob cut then. And they were after boys, right? And then a second later, I was I was kind of like relieved suddenly. And this is, a child processing this, right? As a 7-year-old. And I felt relieved because I suddenly looked at my color and I went, oh, I'll be fine because I'm dark. I'm not like those boys. And all the Sikh boys, at least in my little boarding school world and in my world in Delhi that I had seen, Sikh community is generally very fair. I had only seen fair skinned Sikh people then. And so I basically told myself, I'll be fine because I'm dark. And so they won't think that I'm Sikh. Yeah. And so I'm not, even though I look like a boy, I won't be dead. This is not the end for me today. So yeah, there is, there's so many prejudices that we hold, right? Whether we like it or not, and whether we like to hear this or not, consciously, unconsciously, we see somebody, we judge them immediately. We want to pigeonhole them immediately. Oh, well, they look like this, so they must be from that community. And before you know it, you start building these prejudices in your head if you've had any negative experiences from people of that community. And
Mm-hmm.
then, you claim that you're not racist, but even people of color can be racist then, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there
Okay.
is so much unlearning, I think, that even we have to do as people of color. Like, for example, Indians are really racist towards Black people. Why? Because they're darker than them. So
Yep.
it's like, it's disgusting and it's shameful. So yeah, there is a lot of work that I think, not just in terms of educating white people and white supremacy and all that and talking about that, but also a lot of work that we have to do for ourselves and within ourselves to eradicate that sort of prejudice from our mindset.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I don't think a lot of people, especially like in America, who just think of the black-white divide, or they'll think that, you know what, the racism, especially like the social justice warriors, a lot of white people who feel like they're trying to kind of make amends for some of the things, and they'll feel like, well, in my community, my predominantly white community, that's not a problem. Um, we're not having that problem anymore. But they
Mm,
don't factor in that, okay, some people in the Black community might be still experiencing that from the Indian community or the Korean community or the Chinese community, or even some definitely say possibly Mexican or Ecuadorian or
mm,
Salvadorian. Different cultures still might come in with some of these, this racism. And so you personally in your circle might not be engaging in these things or trying your best to not engage in them. It doesn't mean that it's still not being experienced in various other ways.
right.
And I like for people, especially to be able to hear your story, that you can call that out amongst your community, and also that they can see that there are people like you who are trying to not be a part of any of that. Because in America, what I've been seeing lately, and it's really disconcerting to me, because I consider myself BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color. And
Mm-hmm.
so I believe very strongly in the Black and Brown Alliance, because I
Mm,
believe a lot of us are literally going through the same thing,
yeah.
but we other ourselves. And like right now in America, I don't know if you know about it, but there's literally even othering from the Black community here. Like all of us who came over through the diaspora
Mm,
literally came from like maybe I think it's like 5 different countries. Most of the people through the transatlantic slave trade came from. So
mm-hmm.
a lot of the people came from the same tribes, whether they're in the United States or all the way as far away as Brazil or Chile.
Right.
Literally, they all would go back to like the same tribes. But
Mm,
some people here might be like, well, I'm not the same as those people in Dominican Republic. I don't want to talk to them. And it's just, I tell people the difference is you just had different slave masters.
yeah.
One spoke English, one spoke Spanish, another one spoke French over here in Haiti and in like the Louisiana purchases. And even in places like Sierra Leone, in North Africa, they're experiencing the same thing. And I just like for people to be more abreast of the totality of the situation and other people's struggles that are going on. And some people don't even factor in some of the people who are darker in some of these places like India and I'm trying to think what's Malaysia and some of these other places over there, Thailand, because a lot of people don't think that there are darker people over there.
Mm,
Some of these people do have some roots that come through the sub-Saharan slave trade, the Silk Road slave trade out of Africa, and have just been there for their family have been there from centuries and centuries. And when you have population emulsion, the mixing, over time, some people who might be more fair might
mm,
have their DNA will still show those ties back to these places.
Yeah.
But on the outside, they don't necessarily appear that way, and vice versa for somebody who might be darker, who has more blood that's indigenous to where they're at. So just some of your thoughts on that.
Um, so I mean, yeah, the whole purity culture, right, is is insane. I don't understand why people claim, that purity, and why they aspire to find that purity in their blood, because actually, isn't it beautiful that we have mixed blood and we come from different, backgrounds and all that. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, obviously, I don't want to trivialize when I say mixed blood, all the atrocities that, because of
Mm-hmm.
colonization and the slave trade, that unfortunately women being violated by white men, and therefore having mixed
Mm-hmm.
babies, etc. Don't want to trivialize that, but over time, we're talking millions and millions and millions of years, right? Let's go back in time to the Neanderthals, and like how they moved across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's what we do as humans, right? Like that's so. I really don't understand why people want to claim that purity. I just don't get it. And secondly, um, that kind of divide that people are creating for themselves, and as you said, othering other people of color, like, well, that's not my experience, or I don't care about their experience, or white people saying that, oh, we don't see any of that here, we don't have this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, if you kind of, firstly, you need to look much further than within your community. You cannot for once now say that, oh, we don't have this problem, because we live in a global world now. You have access to everything. You have access to social media. You have access to the news, global news. You have access to Google. How can you say we don't have that
Yeah.
problem?
Yeah.
Because nobody in this day and age should be focusing, in my opinion, on only and only where they live, and only their community. These problems are global problems, and we can't be saying that's not my problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of, obviously a lot of work to be done with regards to this, I feel. But it is a tricky one, because I have to say, like, I'll, I have a confession to make. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so this was almost like a year ago, where, I hadn't kind of found my voice, I guess, or even when I had on social media, I wasn't as strong. In terms of like what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. And I guess this is also somewhere in my head, subconsciously, like where I was kind of going back to being a 6-year-old girl and being bullied and not knowing what to say, being submissive. So about
Mm-hmm.
a year ago, I was given this opportunity as part of a diverse production of like various different talent. And I hadn't even launched my book yet, but somebody who, read the first few chapters gave me this opportunity and said, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. We'd love you to read the first chapter of your book, do a reading on stage. So I did. And the first chapter is about my awakening. It's about my guilt after the George Floyd murder.
Yeah.
It's about really analyzing, why have I come to this point, and why did I allow colorism to take over my self-esteem and my mindset, talking about white supremacy and white skin privilege, etc. There were two white men in the audience, right in the front row.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they were really uncomfortable, really, really uncomfortable, and they didn't clap. I was the only act they didn't clap for, because I could see them from backstage, right
Mm-hmm.
after I finished my reading. And then they came in backstage and they commended everybody for their performance, but they didn't even look at me.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't even look at me. And I felt like I had done something wrong by making them uncomfortable. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
You know,
I know.
and you shouldn't feel that way, right? Firstly, they shouldn't make me feel that way.
Yeah.
Um, and secondly, we're talking about white supremacy and white skin privilege in this day and age. And, surely if they're attending an event at Cambridge University, they must be educated and, wise, well-traveled global people, I'm guessing. Um, so why did they take that personally, right? Well, if you are taking it personally, I hate to say this, that means that you are somewhere deep down inside holding prejudices against certain
Oh,
people
definitely.
at certain
Well,
times.
education does not stop people. The level of education you have does not stop you from being immune to these types of thought processes,
Exactly.
especially when you have educational system which has, you know, blind racism in built into some of the coursework.
Mhm.
I mean, just think about it. I listen to a pastor who's roughly about 60 years old,
Mhm.
roughly about by my mother's age, who's talking
Mhm.
about literally trashing Africa, saying before colonization, black people didn't do anything, it didn't have anything, and if it wasn't for colonization, Africa would still be basically in mud huts and stuff like that. And it's like, oh my God, do you not understand the rich history?
What's
Which,
wrong with that? Exactly. What is wrong with that, right?
I mean, well,
Sorry,
it,
sorry. I just found that ludicrous.
the Vatican, for instance, when they went into the Congo, they were literally blown away. Like King Leopold was like blown away. Look at the kingdoms, and he's like, not King Leopold, but like the Roman Catholic Church, the emissaries who went down there, and the Pope who went down there. He was like stunned that Africa had like huge like kingdoms
Mm,
that he was seeing down there, and there's just so many. And our education system, they don't put those kind of things in there. It's a
mm,
big focus on what happens in Europe and a dismissing of everything that happens in Africa, South America, and various different parts of Asia.
mhm,
Except maybe China and Japan, but everywhere else they don't focus on India's rich history, which is much older than a lot of these other cultures. And I guess like and I want to say this definitely for everybody out there, please take the time, especially if you're a book reader, go out and get her book. It was some areas that I was reading that was painful for me to read, thinking of a child going through what you were going through, that feeling, you know, of being alone and not being able to push back, because I that ties to me also. I've had that kind of scared to speak back to certain authorities or so-called people who were bullying me. Those in It was different. Yeah, that feeling was the same. I've had racist mobs literally throwing bricks at our schools and having to run, and the basketball, and hearing white parents saying, I'll just say it plainly, you better not let those niggers beat you. I mean, hearing this. And so I felt a deep tie to some of the stuff you were saying in there. And then even it felt painful for me reading about you talking about the first times you were bleaching yourself and your mental process that was going on and how it was blotchy and you're wiping it off and all those things. And it's a lot of it that was, you know, even though I wasn't experiencing what you were experiencing, I did feel I felt like I could kind of understand what you were going through and where you were coming from. I guess last thing I kind of wanted you to go into, because I don't want to keep you too much longer, even
mhm.
though I know we can definitely have this conversation much longer. Um, I want you to explain to the people what your name is and where it comes from and how that kind of really kind of, you know, gave you kind of an internal kind of battle and struggle, because I remember the conversation that you had with your father about why did they name you Sweta.
Mhm. So, my name Shweta means, in Sanskrit, it means as pure or as clean as the color white, which for me became the biggest irony of my life because, as I was saying, I was a lot darker and more melanated as a child. And so I got bullied, and I was called Blackie in school for a very long time, the ugly duckling in my fair skinned family, so on, you know, the black sheep, you name it. I mean, the bad apple, like everything, whatever the kids, you know, found funny was what I was called. Um, so I remember around, like, I would say 14 or 15, just really being angry with my parents for choosing my name as Shweta, because I said, well, that's not me. That's not my color. I'm the opposite of Shweta. You know, I'm dark. Why did you give me that name? And they said to me, well, it's not about your color for you. It's for us, it's about you. We want to see, we see you as a pure and beautiful child, and that's why we named you that. And but as you can imagine, as a teenager in school, I mean, children can be awful and they can be mean, right?
Mhm.
um, I was made fun of for my name because it didn't match my color.
Mhm.
So it's yeah, I think, I mean, that's another thing that I would like to say, with regards to the book, and um, how we can educate our children about the vocabulary and the words that we use, and be very mindful of the words that we use. Because, for example, in my household, especially having been through what I have been through, the very first time my kids used the word ugly in the house, I immediately sat them down and I said, never, ever do I want to hear this word repeated in this house. In your vocabulary, you don't have the words ugly, dumb, stupid, and any negative words like that. We do not use those words on us in the house or anybody else, ever.
Mhm.
Because, these are the words that stick, especially for a child. And
Mhm.
so I wanted to say thank you for understanding my pain, because
Mhm.
I wanted to take the reader on that journey to for them to understand, like, really the mindset of what's going on. How is a 6-year-old processing this, and how is a teenager processing this, all these comments and all these horrible nicknames, and being bullied, and how is a 20-year-old processing this, and why women like me succumb to skin whitening products. I mean, there is a reason why it's silently lived by millions, right? And that's why the skin whitening industry is thriving, because millions and millions of women out there are going through a very similar process that I have been through. Um, so, yeah, I just want to say thank you again for giving me this opportunity to speak
Yeah,
about
oh,
it.
I'm so glad that you accepted it. And I feel like it can kind of these types of conversations. Like you said before, they definitely need to happen. They need to be happening on a much larger scale. They need to be happening more frequently, also. And the only like I always believe the only way you can deal with the problem is to talk about the problem. If you can't address what the problem is, then how can you ever get past it? And it it's kind of like when you were talking about with the George Floyd part, which you talk about in your book, the very first chapter. It gets into how you could see the problem that was going on with George Floyd, but at the same time, you had kind of forgotten about the internal problems that you were having, and not even realizing that it was still affecting you. And like that story with your daughter and seeing you with the creams, and I'm pretty sure that cognitively you weren't even really thinking about what you were doing to that point, or kind of gotten numb to it because you've been doing it the cream so long.
Mhm.
But I just I commend you for coming out and speaking on that. Well, another thing that I would say that you put in the book about the childhood bedwetting. I'll give a disclaimer to the audience. I was a kid who suffered with that also, and
Mhm.
suffered with it for a long time. And so I do know the embarrassment, the shame that you can have, the like you talked about not wanting to have sleepovers at friends' house because you're worried about having an accident over there and being picked on. And I mean, just imagining you having to, as a 6-year-old, having to scrub your own sheets and hang them out and all that with all the other kids in the boarding school. There's a lot of those things. I feel like I don't think people realize the struggles that other people go through, and they just look at them in a snapshot in today and don't understand people's journey, what's got them to where they are, and what scars that they might have on the inside that we don't see on the outside.
That's exactly it. So I have so many friends and supporters on Instagram, and all other social media platforms. They obviously see my post. They see this, like, confident, that they I appear to be confident to them, and they think that, oh my God, like, we never ever thought that you had suffered from this low self-esteem for this many years. Even close friends of mine, really close
Mhm.
friends of mine, who I've known since the age of 6 or 7, like even friends from Japan who've read the book, they said, we had no idea that this is how much it impacted you.
Mhm.
And I told them, I said, it's it's because children, that's another thing that I want to mention. Children don't talk. They internalize everything, right?
Mm.
They will never ever run to their mummy and daddy and say, please sit down, I'd like to have a chat with you, I'm feeling uncomfortable about something.
Yeah.
Because children don't know how to do that. Yeah.
Hmm.
They process it internally. Parents need to find a way of understanding the child's behavior and say, what's going on?
Hmm.
Has something happened? Let's sit down, let's talk about this. And likewise with my bedwetting, again, boarding school. I mean, actually, this is the first time I'm having this conversation. It's funny you mentioned that, because the book has been out for 3 months, read by hundreds and hundreds of friends and supporters. Not a single person, even in my reviews or anything, not a single person has mentioned, I'm really sorry to hear that you went through this whole bedwetting experience, and for so many years, like, oh, that must have been terrible. It's almost like that's stigmatized. Don't want to talk about bedwetting. And that's one of the
Hmm.
reasons why I wrote about it in the book, because I felt like people just don't talk about it. They don't understand how what a child is going through. The parents talk about it because they are fed up, quote unquote, of their children bedwetting or their child bedwetting, and they're finding remedies and looking for things, and all of that, and they may talk about it to their friends, or maybe not, because again, it's something that is so embarrassing, like, never mention it to anybody. But children, of course, don't talk about it. They're not going to I'm not going to confide in a friend saying I wet my bed.
Yeah.
um, so what do? You internalize it, right?
Hmm.
And what does it do to you, your mindset, and what does it do to you feeling like you're inadequate? um, so that's why I wanted to write about it, although it's not quite related to colorism, but it's something that I felt very strongly that I wanted to write about because it's stigmatized.
Oh yeah, and and that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I know that that's something that affected me, and I know how that felt, that that feeling of shame and
Mm.
embarrassment, and how it, though it's not necessarily connected to this, it is, as in the psyche of a person, all the things that kind of go into that. Just like if you're making a smoothie, if you put apples in and bananas and strawberries, all of these things become a part of that
Mm.
smoothie. Just like all of our experience is, they all work together, the good, the bad, the ugly, to our self-esteem and confidence now and this day. And I figured that since you talked about that, that can help other people who, dealt with that also. So it was just, I felt like there were plenty of lessons that can be taught and understood by hearing another person speak out and about what they experienced, and other people can have more courage to talk about those different traumas that they experienced also. So I'm just very, very, happy that you wrote the book, for one.
Wow,
I
thank
feel
you.
courageous
Thank
enough
you so
that you told us your story. That because I know that there, like you said, there are millions of people who are going through similar stories like this, who don't talk about it and internalize it. And like you said, kids don't talk about this. And when you talked about your daughter kind of like catching you and you guys having a conversation, and you feeling like the roles switch, whereas you were the child and your daughter was, kind of like asking you what's going on. I think we all need to not be afraid to talk and have these things. And we need to, like, granted, I don't have any children, I have nieces, but we need to be able to talk to kids and tell them, hey, if you have an issue, you need to not be afraid to talk to your parents, or talk to maybe an uncle or aunt or grandparent or some adult that you feel comfortable with. And if we can start these earlier dialogues, it can help with children's self-esteem and confidence, and be more productive adults and more thoughtful adults.
100%.
I was going to say, and of course, anything else that you wanted to add in, but I wanted you to let everybody know where they can reach out to you, where they can find your book, different engagements that you might have coming up that people can possibly go to. Because I know that sometimes I might have visitors who might be in the UK, who
Mm.
might go to a book reading, or an event that you might have, or interviews that you have planned coming up.
No, thank you so much. So thanks again for giving me this opportunity, and for also being really empathetic, with regards to me sharing my story, and understanding my mindset, because, sometimes, as I said, it's just trivialized.
Mhm.
So, well, very often it's trivialized. So, thank you again. The book, I decided to write it as a personal story. I thought about writing it as a third person fictional story. She did this and this happened to her and all that. And I thought, actually, I think I'm ready to share it as my story, because I know that if there's a real person in front of other people, they will connect with me more, and I'll give them that encouragement to share their story. Whereas if it's a fictional story, then they may not find that encouragement. So that for me actually has been the most amazing thing, because I have so many people now messaging me on social media on a regular basis and sharing their experiences with me, because they know that there's a real person who's been through this.
Mhm.
So I'm really, really glad that I did it that way, and it's resonating with people. So I feel really proud to be making a difference now. So um, and it's helping people heal. So like the bedwetting resonated with you. So that you're not alone. That there's comfort, as terrible as a subject may be. When you know that you're not alone, there's comfort in knowing that. So yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you again for whoever's listening. If you are looking to heal from colorism, or unfortunately the book might be painful for you because it might resonate with you if you've been through experiences. I feel like we have to kind of walk through that pain to begin with, and then comes the healing. So I wrote The Black Rose for that purpose. The book is available on Amazon, everywhere. So if you thank you, if you do check it out, please, please, please drop me a message on any of my social media channels. Halfway through reading it, anything, I'd love to kind of read the book along with you and have a chat with you, and what you're thinking and how you're processing it. Um, for me, this is not about the book. It's about me spreading my message through the book and through social media, and just being there for people who want to talk about their experiences, and being that kind of healing agent. I know I have healed from writing it. I know that I've spent a few £1,000s on writing it, but I could have spent that on therapy. So actually, I thought, well, why not write the story and let's help other people heal? So that is always, 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 it has always been my primary purpose, and will remain my primary purpose. Um, and on social media, I am available with the handle The Black Rose Way on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. This has been good, and I'll make sure that I definitely keep in communication with you
Please do.
about different stuff, especially as I completely finish the book. And then uh, we'll talk. We'll talk more offline. But
Definitely. I'd love
I,
to keep it.
yeah, I mean, because I think that there's so much that you talked about that connects to so many different issues, and there are more channels which I'm going to probably definitely refer them to you if you're open to other interviews, and try to see, because what I've learned is through watching interviews with people, every person has a different take and perspective, and so there's a little bit more that gets pulled out because it touches people in different ways, and so somebody else is going to bring up something that will help somebody else who's dealing with something that you experience. And so definitely look forward to that. I want to thank everybody who took the time to catch us live, especially for you guys on the Pacific. It's a little early out here, so definitely thank you guys, and thank you for everybody who is going to check this later on. I definitely commend you guys all, and definitely commend Shweta here, and hopefully you have a wonderful day, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for listening and joining in.